everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. This week, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to visually impaired astronomer and creator of the Tactile Universe project, Nic Bonne. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hey Nick, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks, Evie. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Well, firstly, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's such a privilege to be able to talk to you.
It's my pleasure.
But secondly, how's your day going so far?
It's been pretty good. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but I've spent a lot of the day replying to emails. Yeah, I got to do a little bit of fun design work as well. So yeah, it's been good.
Oh, that's cool. Love that. So I know that you, like myself, are visually impaired. So to begin with, could you tell me a little bit about your VI condition?
Sure. So I was actually born 3 months premature, and because of that, because I was so small, because my lungs weren't properly developed, I was put in something called a humidicrib, which is basically this enclosed capsule. And back in the 80s, they used to pump those full of basically a really oxygen-rich atmosphere so that I could breathe, so that I would stay alive while I sort of finished developing those last 3 months that I was sort of supposed to be in the womb. The problem with that, though, is that really rich oxygen atmosphere actually damaged my eyes as they grew. And so I have an eye condition called retinopathy of prematurity, um, which is basically damage to the retinas caused by premature birth and that early exposure to oxygen. Um, so the retina is the bit at the very back of the eye that receives light, kind of like a chip in a camera, I guess, is the sort of electronic comparison you could make. And so mine, you can sort of imagine they're a little bit melted. They're not quite where they're supposed to be. Lots of my retina doesn't work properly, so any little bits and pieces of it sort of receive any light and send that information back to my brain. So I do actually have a tiny bit of usable vision, but not very much. But on top of all of that, I'm also short-sighted. So both my parents are short-sighted, so I inherited that from them as well. So to see anything at all, I sort of have to put things right up against my nose, right up against my eyes to sort of make stuff out. I also have another condition called nystagmus, where my eyes dance around quite a lot. So yeah, lots of stuff going on. But yeah, the long and the short of it is that I do have a tiny bit of usable vision, but stuff has to be really close to my face for me to sort of be able to make anything out.
Right, okay, yeah, I can totally imagine. But yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot going on there, with, your eye conditions and things like that. Now, I know that you are an astronomer and you're based at Portsmouth University. And I was wondering, where does your interest in astronomy kind of stem from?
So it actually started for me when I was really little. So I grew up in Australia. You might be able to tell from my accent that
Yep.
it's not sort of bog standard British. There's a little bit of something else there. So I was born in a town called Bendigo, which is, I think, when I was born there, it was a population of about 80 or 100,000 people. So not very big. It was really easy to sort of get out to really clear, dark night skies with my family. And so even though I couldn't necessarily see a whole lot of that, we would still sort of go for family trips on weekends to just be out under the night sky. And I could see a little bit of what was up there, but my parents, my brothers would also spend a lot of time just telling me what they could see and sort of describing stuff to me. And so I think from a really young age, that sort of shared experience of being out there in the wild and under the night sky had a really big impact on, I guess, what I was interested in and what I was passionate about. And so I think when I was about 5, there was a documentary on TV that I really vividly remember sort of watching. It was all about so these 2 space probes that NASA sent to the outer planets in our solar system, called Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. And they basically sent back the first proper pictures, like close-up pictures that we had of the gas giants, sort of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, as well as a lot of their moons. Um, and I remember sitting with my face pressed right up against the screen, sort of trying to see these beautiful pictures. And it came over, like sort of the documentary wound its way around to Neptune. And Carl Sagan, who's was a really famous science communicator and American astronomer, was doing the narration for the image of Neptune, and he described it as being like the deepest, darkest blue ocean. And I could kind of make out that it was really blue as well. And I think his description just really, really gelled with me. And it sounded so mysterious and wonderful. But then I think sort of from that point, I started thinking about just how big space was and how much stuff there is out there that we still don't understand, that we don't know about, how much stuff there is still left to discover, how big everything is, how vast everything is, how separated everything is. And yeah, I think sort of from that point on, even though I was only 5, I was just completely hooked on the idea of learning about space and learning about the universe.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. So from that point on then, was it like a definite thing that you wanted to be an astronomer?
Yeah, so I think sort of from that, yeah, from the age of 5, I was pretty much like, yeah, I'm going to become an astronomer. This is such a cool job. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I think I was lucky that my parents, none of my teachers, nobody sort of said, "But you're blind. You're going to find that really, really difficult. Why don't you choose something else?" Everybody else was just kind of like, "Oh, okay, that sounds good. We'll work with you on that." Um, and I think that makes me quite blessed in a lot of ways. I think that yeah, nobody sort of tried to say, "No, that's going to be difficult. You shouldn't do that."
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really important, especially when you're a kid and you're quite innocent, quite naive. I think it's really important to have people around you who don't underestimate the things that you're able to do just because you have a disability or whatever that may be, and just kind of let you figure those things out for yourself. And that's the thing that I think a lot of my guests have said about that, having like a support network around you, having people who believe in you and are willing to help you. I think it really helps in a lot of areas.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think, I mean, it's taken me a long time to get good at this, but I think being able to advocate for yourself as well, because really you're the expert on what you can do, what you might need to succeed. And you just need those people around you who are willing to listen to you. If you reach out for help, or if you say, look, something needs to change, it needs to be done this way instead so I can access it. And yeah, I think we're so lucky, so blessed if we're in a situation where that can actually happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned that being a child, because of the area you lived in, it had quite a sort of small population. You were able to go out on trips with your family and look up at the night sky and things like that. And I would imagine that even though you weren't necessarily able to see everything, I would imagine that the fact that you still got to be a part of that made you feel quite included. I would imagine that's a really nice feeling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was so much about that shared experience and sort of picking up on the excitement of my brothers, my mother, my father, when something exciting was going on and they were sort of telling me about it. So yeah, it was really sort of a group thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think sometimes it's just nice to be in a certain atmosphere, even if you can't necessarily see everything. It's just nice to be around people and pick up on the vibe that they're giving off and just be in that atmosphere.
I mean, the analogy I always lean into is sort of going to a football match where you maybe can't see a lot of what's actually going on in the game, but you can still have a great experience because the crowd around you is just so full of energy and so excited. And so it is that massive stadium-wide shared experience, even if you can't necessarily see who's kicking the ball or who scored a goal or anything else like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally get that. Now, obviously, astronomy has a very visual element to it. So, what kind of challenges did you face when you were studying it?
Yeah, so I'd actually argue it's probably one of the most visual sciences. And a lot of that, to be honest, nowadays is traditional more than practical. It's just the way that things have always been done. And so it's the way people sort of continue to do things. So there's this sort of, I guess, slightly outdated idea of astronomers peering through telescopes at the universe and sort of taking that, what they see, and sort of working with it to try and understand things better. Whereas in reality, most of the work we do nowadays is digital. So we don't look through telescopes. We have instruments that do that for us. They collect the information digitally, and then we use that to do our science. So it's actually really rare for somebody to actually be physically peering through a telescope. Um, but because we still rely so heavily on turning that data into images, yeah, it was definitely not the easiest thing for me to access a lot of the time. So in school, obviously I did a lot of maths, I did a lot of physics to sort of learn the stuff that I needed to start understanding astronomy, because astronomy is all about, I guess, the mathematics and the physics that governs the universe. Um, a lot of the time it was just, I mean, again, I had really good teachers. I think I had teachers who were willing to sort of sit down, spend that little bit of extra time with me. If they'd explained something in a context that I couldn't relate to because it was too visual, they would often spend a bit of time with me trying to find an analogy or a concept that I could actually relate to that would help me understand. Or they'd find a demonstration that I could interact with a little bit more that would sort of help me. When I got to university, though, yeah, I guess I did struggle a lot there. But once again, I had educators who were really on board with the idea of me becoming an astronomer, so they were willing to spend that little bit of extra time. Um, I was able to record my lectures so that I could catch up on note taking, which was really good. Everyone was good about making all of my textbooks, making all of my worksheets, everything like super big so that I could see stuff. If there was stuff that I could use computers to access or text to speech, they were really good about doing that as well. Um, they would always ask me whether a lab class was going to be accessible, and if it wasn't, we'd talk about how I could either learn the stuff I needed to learn without doing that lab class, or how we could maybe make that lab class more accessible. So there was a lot of stuff. And then when it actually came time for me to start my PhD and actually sort of start, I guess, doing my official astronomy qualifications, I actually quit my first attempt. I'd sort of gotten myself to the stage where I'd convinced myself that asking anybody else for help was going to be an inconvenience to those other people, that I was imposing on people. And so I let stuff get really, really bad in terms of access. Just because I wasn't asking for help, I was kind of in this loop where I was really depressed, really not asking for help, getting more depressed, not asking for help. And so, yeah, I actually quit my first PhD attempt after 2.5 years. Um, I then went away. I did a whole bunch of random jobs. I worked in a video store. I worked in a warehouse. I did some data entry for just this random company who was looking at medical data. All of these things. But while I was doing that, I also got some help. I talked to a really good therapist. I started to understand myself, how depression, how anxiety could affect me. I also built up my self-confidence again. Uh, the idea of asking for help sort of became a less scary thing. And then I was really lucky that back at my original university where I'd done my undergraduate degree, one of the astronomers there contacted me and said, "Would you like to have another shot? Would you like to try and do your PhD again?" And so I said yes. And it took me 4.5 years. But yeah, I got all the way through the second time. Um, in that second attempt, um, I was a bit more careful about the kinds of work I was doing. So I was dealing with a lot of numbers, a lot of data. So I didn't have to rely quite as much on images. I could sort of work out what I needed to know about the astronomy I was studying based on the numbers that I had access to. But I did still struggle when I had to, say, compare the numbers for a particular galaxy or particular object that I had to an image of that object to make sure that my numbers were telling me the right thing. Sometimes, yeah, I had to literally turn to my office mates and go, "Can you actually see this picture? I can't make anything out." And so there was still, I guess, that reliance on other people, and I definitely found that a little bit frustrating. And that's actually kind of what springboarded the tactile universe. But yeah, we can talk about that a little bit more later.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we are going to, but I can imagine that feeling once you completed your PhD and you got that, especially since it was the second time round. I can imagine that must have been such an incredible feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, I was really proud. I mean, it was a lot of hard work. I mean, like we said at the start, it was something that I wanted to do from the age of 5. And so when I quit that first attempt at a PhD, I'd kind of convinced myself that that was it. I was going to have to find something else to dream about, something else to be passionate about. And yeah, being able to actually come around and get that second chance and yeah, have the support that I needed, but also be more confident in myself, I think was just yeah, kind of a life-defining experience, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think things like self-confidence and like you said, asking for help, they can be quite difficult things, to be honest. I think sometimes we are so convinced that we can do something by ourselves that even when we know we physically can't, we'll still try and push ourselves just to prevent us from asking for help, when actually it's really important that we do ask for help. And it's such a difficult thing to like get your head around and be able to do.
I think it's definitely a balance as well, because there is a lot of merit in doing stuff yourself, being independent. But I think as we get older and older, it's easier to recognize when that experience is going to become frustrating and maybe detrimental to us, either in terms of like us physically or our mental health or other things like that. And yeah, it took me a long time. I was well and truly into my 30s before I got better at doing that. And I still backslide sometimes. Sometimes I get really stubborn and I want to do everything myself, and then I nearly set our kitchen on fire because I tried to cook something that I shouldn't. So yeah, it's I think it's always going to be a bit of a learning process, and that's okay as well.
Yeah, definitely. I can completely understand that. And you're right, it is a total learning process. So let's talk a little bit about the Tactile Universe then. So I know that you lead the Tactile Universe project. So can you tell me a little bit about that and what it entails?
Yep. So yeah, the Tactile Universe is a project that we started in 2016. We initially started really local to Portsmouth. It was a really small sort of pilot idea. It had actually started because I had a number of, I guess, really fortuitous conversations with various people at my work. So one person had sort of posed me the question, what could you have done to make your PhD work easier for you? And my response to that had basically been, well, if I can make the images tactile, I would have had much more success feeling those and understanding them than I would if I, sort of had to look at them the way that I did. It so happened that one of my other colleagues who had a bit of experience making 3D models on computers was sitting across the corridor in a different office. And he happened to just be listening in on that conversation. And he went away and actually made the first sort of prototype tactile image that we now use for Tactile Universe. Found a 3D printer, 3D printed it, brought it to me and said, is this what you were talking about? And so that was sort of the beginning of the project. Um, so initially, we worked really closely with a blind and vision impaired support group. So mostly older people, sort of pensioners, a couple of younger people as well. Um, we made a whole bunch of tactile images of things like galaxies, and we brought those images in. We talked to those people, and we got their feedback on um, sort of what worked about the models, what didn't, whether they were too detailed, whether there wasn't enough detail, whether they were too big, too small, but also whether the descriptions that we were using to talk about things like galaxies were actually going to work for that audience, whether we were relying too heavily on visual stuff. So beyond that pilot, we got a decent chunk of funding from the Science and Technology Facilities Council, and we decided that we really wanted to focus the project on working with vision impaired students in schools across the UK to basically provide a way of accessing astronomy, I guess, that would be a little bit more exciting, a little bit more accessible. Um, Not necessarily to convince people to become astronomers, but just to sort of show that there were ways that people could access astronomy if that was something that they wanted to do in less visual ways. And so the project's really grown from there. We've developed a whole suite of tactile and now a couple of audio resources as well. We've woven them into workshops that work for students in upper primary and lower secondary and in upper secondary. Um, we do some of the delivery ourselves. So we go out to schools, we work with young people, we deliver those workshops, sometimes just to the vision impaired students, but also sometimes to mainstream classrooms that maybe only have one or two vision impaired students in them. The advantage with that second option is that we're we're basically showing everybody that access can help. We're not just getting one or two people to use those tactile resources, we're getting everyone to use the tactile resources together. Um, but one really important aspect of the project as well has been that we've been able to train a whole bunch of other people around the country to also use these resources and to sort of get excited about the project. So sort of starting in 2018 all the way up until last year, we've run about 7 or 8 big sort of training workshops that have been attended by educators, by science communicators, by researchers. And a lot of the times, people who've attended those workshops would then been able to sort of send them our resource kits so that they can use the resources with their local blind and vision impaired student communities as well. So yeah, it's a really fun project to work on.
Yeah, it really sounds like it. And I mean, that is incredible. So when you're creating these models then, what's the kind of process that you go through in order to create them?
So it's pretty straightforward. Well, okay, that's maybe a lie, but we'll see. Um, what we usually try and do is create tactile versions of actual images taken by telescopes. And so thinking about galaxies for a second, a galaxy image is basically just a picture of a lot of stars, a lot of starlight in the night sky. And galaxies form some really beautiful shapes. So some of them are shaped like spirals, some of them just look like big fuzzy balls. But the way your eyes would interpret them if you were somebody who was fully sighted looking at an image of a galaxy is you would see which bits of that image were brighter, which bits were dimmer, and you would build an overall picture of the shape of that object. And so when we make our models, what we actually do is we model the brightness in any part of the image. So where there's more light or more stars in that part of the galaxy, that part of the image will be more raised. Where there's less light, that part of the image will be less raised. And so by running your fingertip over the surface that we create, you're basically getting the same information that your eyes would get if you were looking at the galaxy image. You're feeling the shape, you're feeling which bits are bright, which bits are dim. And it really is sort of a one-to-one scale of brightness to sort of tactile height. Um, yeah, so a pretty simple idea, a really nice sort of tactile analogy for a visible image, but a little bit abstract if you think about it, because we're still talking about something that's 2D. We just turn it into something that's 3D instead.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that obviously you mentioned you incorporate audio elements as well. And I know that you sometimes have like a visual representation on the back of the model for someone who still has a little bit of sight that they are able to use as well.
Yeah, so we do try to make the models as versatile as we can. That was one of the advantages of sort of co-creating these with blind and vision impaired people as well, was I mean, we could have taken the easy route and just gone, well, I'm blind, so these work for me, so they'll work for everybody. But of course, we know that that's not true. We know that everybody with a vision impairment is unique. We have unique ways of accessing the world, unique needs. And so, yeah, we really wanted to make the models as versatile as we could. So we sort of talked to as many people as we could, and we got as much feedback as we possibly could. And yeah, one of the suggestions we got from somebody who was partially sighted was, well, I don't just want to make my model tactile, I want to be able to see something as well. And so, yeah, we mirror the image that we use to make the model, place that on the back of the model. And so it means people can look at that and sort of feel the corresponding tactile features on the other side. When it comes to audio stuff, so most recently we've developed resources around an area of astronomy called gravitational waves. And so these are literal ripples in the fabric of the universe that are caused by things like black holes colliding with each other. So these cataclysmic events, like in the distant universe, cause these tiny little vibrations to sort of pass through space and time. And we can pick those up with special detectors. But we can also turn that signal into an audio sound that you can listen to it. And it's actually called an audio chirp because it sounds like a bird chirping because it's basically the waves getting stronger and stronger and stronger and closer together as these black holes spiral in towards each other and then eventually collide. And so we have tactile surfaces that represent those waves moving outwards from the black holes as they come together. But then we also play the chirp alongside those just to add that extra dimension to what people are experiencing.
Right, okay, yeah. I mean, that makes total sense to do that. So, looking long term then, would you like to be able to sort of expand the project and possibly develop accessibility in different areas of physics?
Yeah, so I think one of the longer term goals of the project, and this is something I hope to tackle in maybe the next 4 or 5 years, is we do want to start looking at developing resources for more sort of core physics topics. So things that vision impaired and blind students might traditionally find it difficult to access. And luckily, I can probably draw on my own experiences here. So subjects that I know I really struggled to learn. So obviously things like light, learning about waves, learning about gravity as well. So yeah, we really do want to start looking at developing some resources for those really core physics topics. Um, the advantage there is that more students are probably going to be able to access that and will get some use out of them. Because while astronomy is really cool, while it's really, really interesting, it isn't always maybe as useful for students to learn about. I mean, it can inspire people, and that's really, really important. But unless people want to become astronomers, it can be a little more difficult to sort of, I guess, convince schools that they should be learning or sort of teaching their students about astronomy. Whereas if we're targeting those really core sort of topics in physics, we will be able to reach more students just because teachers will see the value, I guess, in those kinds of things.
Yeah, definitely. I can totally agree with you there. I think I mean I really enjoy science at school. I really like it as a subject, but I can totally agree with you that those areas of physics such as like light, colors, waves, gravity, those really visual aspects can be so difficult to get your head around. I would imagine even if you're sighted, let alone when you've got no sight and can't really visualize any of it.
Yeah, and I think the way we really want to pitch these resources is that they're not just going to help students who are blind or vision impaired, they're going to help everybody really, because even if you're somebody who's fully sighted, you may not work on a particularly visual level really, really well. Like you may actually benefit more from using sound or using a tactile resource instead. So this is going to be all about giving people the option to use whatever mode of access they're the most comfortable with or is going to be the most beneficial for them. So I think it's going to take a little bit of work to convince people that that's the case, but yeah, it's definitely something that we want to do.
Yeah, totally. And I can imagine, I mean, yes, it will probably take a little bit of convincing, but I think it's such a brilliant idea that once people kind of come round to it, I think it will be so beneficial to, like you said, everyone involved, really, sighted or not. But what would you say are some of the benefits of making science education more accessible?
Well, yeah, so we touched on this a little bit, I guess, but really it's the idea of giving people the ability to access that information in lots of different ways and still get the same information, regardless of whether they're using a tactile resource, an audio resource, a visual resource. And that just really allows people to learn in whichever way they feel the most comfortable. It's obviously going to make things a lot more accessible for a lot of different people as well. So not just blind and vision impaired students, but if there are students who are neurodiverse, maybe tactile resources might help them. Giving them something to hold in their hands will maybe help them concentrate for a little bit longer. I know a lot of members of the deaf community also really like tactile resources as well. So it's just about giving people more options, but also opening up access. Um, I think as well, though, when we think about something like astronomy that's so traditionally visual, I think a lot of the reason we still do things so visually is just tradition. It's not necessarily the most sensible way to access the information. It's just the way that we've always done it, and so people are just kind of used to that. They put up with it. Whereas I think a lot of data is actually going to be it's going to be more powerful to access that using audio or using tactile. And I actually think that we might make new discoveries. If we can get people thinking about stuff in a multimodal sense, if they would traditionally access something visually, if they can access that in an audio sense, they may actually hear things in that data that they would never have seen with their eyes, or they might feel things in that data that they would never have heard or never have seen. So I honestly think that by sort of approaching things in a multimodal way, we're actually going to start discovering new things about data that we sort of thought we'd found everything out about previously.
Yeah, probably. I can totally imagine that. I think it's important in this sort of day and age where we've got really sort of advanced technology and we have a lot more opportunities than we would have done like many years ago. I think it's really important to sort of embrace new ways of doing things. Because, like you said, you might make new discoveries. It's just about being creative and adapting things slightly and embracing new ways of attempting things.
Absolutely.
So, what would you say your kind of current day job entails then?
So yeah, I said this at the start, but yeah, a lot of emails for me. It's My day to day is yeah, responding to a lot of emails, writing a lot of emails. If I'm lucky, I get to do a school visit, so I go out and work with some students. We also collaborate a lot with other groups, so other researchers at other universities, but also things like science centers as well. So occasionally I get to do a little bit of design work. If somebody wants a new tactile model developed, I get to sort of sit down and do that, or work with one of my colleagues who's also working on the project and sort of design something with them. I get to play around with 3D printers quite a bit as well because we produce all of our models using 3D printers that we have in the office. So I get to make sure that those are working, not sort of catching on fire or merrily blazing away in the corner of the office. Um, yeah, when I'm not doing that as well, so I do, because I'm one of the science communicators in our department, my job a lot of the time as well is to, so if somebody's discovered something really cool or if they're doing a really cool bit of science, but if they're not quite sure how to communicate that to an audience who isn't, say, a bunch of other astronomers, I can sit down with them and sort of help them come up with the right language to use or the right way of describing things that will sort of work for that if it's a member of the public or if it's somebody in a press team somewhere or if it's somebody in a school setting or yeah, so that aspect of the job is a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it sounds like you do a good range of things then. And I would imagine that those school visits, the design work, all the other things you do, I would imagine that's quite a nice break from kind of answering and writing emails and kind of being sat by that computer.
It definitely is. I mean, it's yeah, no day is ever quite the same as the next, and I think yeah, that makes the job really enjoyable just because yeah, I know I've got a lot of really cool stuff to look forward to on the horizon. Even if I do have to spend the occasional day just writing email after email after email, there'll be something exciting coming up in a day or two or a week's time. So
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important to kind of keep as positive as possible and keep looking forward to other things that might be coming up soon. So this is a question that I ask quite a lot of my guests. And it's one of my favorite questions to ask because I love everyone's answers to it. So what would you say has been your proudest moment to date?
oh, proudest moment. Oh, that's actually a really tricky question. I think, I mean, in a work context, probably, yeah, finishing my PhD was definitely a really proud moment. More recently, though, I think so. It's taken 8 years of really hard work, but my university has actually just employed me on a permanent basis. And it's to keep developing the tactile universe. So it means that, yeah, I get to stick around, I get to keep doing this kind of work. And the university has, I guess, recognized the value of the stuff that we're doing. And I think, yeah, that makes me really proud. The fact that we've made an impact, that we've shown people that what we're doing can be really valuable, and yeah, that I get to keep on doing that work for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine why that would make you incredibly proud. I mean, it is phenomenal. So looking forward to the future then, do you have any sort of goals or aspirations for the future? And if so, what are they?
Um, so I think thinking sort of longer term, yeah, we really do want to start uh, making as big a difference as we can for the way that young people are educated in terms of science in the UK. So we want to develop those resources. We want to make sure that qualified teachers for the vision impaired and other teachers who might be interacting with vision impaired students know about those resources and have access to them and can use them if there's something that's going to benefit their students. Um, Really long term, though, what we've realized is that while we can really sort of inspire young people to maybe pursue careers in science or interests in science through this project, one thing that's still missing, or one important piece of the puzzle that's still missing, is that a lot of universities still, I guess, aren't really ready for blind and vision impaired students. So, particularly studying degrees like physics and astronomy, um, it can be really tough to study those subjects at university if you don't have that support network, if you don't have those teachers who are willing to spend that extra bit of time sort of working with you. So one thing that we want to do at Portsmouth is make sure that our degree is ready, that if we do get vision impaired students who turn up and want to learn about astronomy, want to learn about physics, that we have the resources that we need and that we have teachers and educators who are willing to spend that time and willing to sort of work. And yeah, my genuine hope is that I can sort of help with that as well. Yeah, I want to make it a little bit easier for other people than it maybe was for me when I did my degrees.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine. And I'm sure that you will be a huge help with that. And I wish you all the best of luck. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I mean, you are such a wonderful and brilliant person, and all the work you're doing with the Tactile Universe project and beyond is absolutely incredible and definitely needed, I think. It's been such a pleasure to be able to talk to you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, that really does mean a lot. And yeah, no, it's been a real honor being part of the podcast.
Oh, thank you once again, and thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.